Perfect. Thank you so much. So welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, evening, morning. So today I will be talking about feelings and desires, and I hope that everyone feels good today. So this is a work in progress, at least partly, so some of the results will be provisional. As the outset is a large research project aimed at improving learning in the university laboratories. So we have several work packages in the project led by two PhD students who have successfully defended their thesis. Myself as a postdoc back then, and most recently, Michael Sirius joined our group on the synthesis of research findings. We also have three other senior researchers in the lab, including the current collaborator, Bente Gamogo. So the results from the project have been synthesized. I think we have remaining work to do, one more article. But there is an ongoing research program that I myself lead, which is centered on the notion of multidimensional learning, comprehensive assessment, and epistemic orientations in higher science education. That's our website if you're interested in knowing more about the project. And it's generously funded by Novo Nordisk Foundation. And for this particular study, I collaborate with three other colleagues. So Aswin Rangkuti, who just finished his PhD at our department, Jonas Niemann, still doing his PhD in equity in science education and science identity, and also Bente Gamogo, who is the PI in the project. So we frame this study in a conceptualization of lab work as epistemic practice. And by that, I mean that in the lab, students are engaged with construction, communication, and evaluation of scientific knowledge. As they move about in the lab, performing various experimental techniques and procedures, they have to activate and regulate not only their cognition, so their thinking faculty, but also their affect in relation to their conation. So also in continual negotiation with their peers on meaning and responsibilities. And in that regard, they always have to coordinate their body and mind, if you will. In a SERP paper there below, it's argued that lab provides a sizable scope for an integration between these different aspects of learning, which arguably leads to an enhanced learning experience. If you're interested in research development on epistemic practices, so another current paper in Science and Education could also be relevant. So this conceptual framework leads to a working model of the hexad of learning domains in the lab as visualized here. It's not rocket science. So it is essentially an overview of student learning from the perspective of science studies and the learning sciences. So the model highlights the importance of looking at the lab as a complex but intellectually stimulating environment in which conceptual and technical goals are set and teaching and learning activities are designed upon an underlying epistemic domain. So for those who are not familiar with the term conation and the conative domain of learning, it's a classical term drawn from Aristotelian philosophy to represent mental processes that drive us to act and strive to perform at the highest level. It entails human needs, intentionality, desires, and will. So today we'll focus on the affective domain. The term affect, so from it's a quite very long research tradition. It refers to positive and negative valence of transactional experiences with certain situations, encompassing emotions and attitudes. From a neuroscience perspective, scientists have identified its multiple subcomponents, including physiological appraisals, expressions, and behaviors that define the relationship between an individual and their environment. Today's talk is also grounded in this JCE paper on faculty perspectives of student learning in the lab, based on the systematic review that we conducted a while ago. So this figure shows how learning in the lab could be regarded as multidimensional, which is centered on experimental competence development. Today's talk will delve deeper into the entanglement between the affective and the epistemic aspects of doing chemistry in the lab. So as Michael has mentioned before, this third paper is a kind of state-of-the-art synthesis of the latest development in lab education research. And my talk today will focus a little bit on these two guiding principles, which is about coherence between learning goals and the assessment. So we seek to address these two research questions. First is, how does epistemic affect manifest in lab discourse during co-construction of knowledge, as well as how and to what extent do students engage with effective learning strategies in the lab. So the study is conducted in the context of a pharmaceutical analytical chemistry lab course, which is aimed at enabling students to conduct reliable quantitative determination of active ingredients using calibrated methods, and also to teach them to evaluate the reliability of the result. And this includes, obviously, an understanding of theoretical principles for the analysis and the influence of experimental conditions on the result. For the present analysis, we are focusing on one module, so that's on experimentation on quantitative determination of acetaminophen and caffeine using HPLC. So the study is ethnographic, involving fieldwork and video registrations. It is also discursive, which is established in the naturalistic setting, so with the video recording, a lot of multimodal interactions in the lab, but also through focus groups with the students. And it's partly quantitative, which is elicited with surveys and multimodal discourse analysis. So all in all, we have 3 data sources from the discourse, the focus groups, and the surveys. So in terms of methodological insight, so this study, we think that it shows that different ways of investigating affect substantiates different facets of the construct. Affect is a very complex notion. The discursive process of eliciting student reasoning during the focus groups also shows how the affective domain plays a crucial role during knowledge co-construction. Students describe their experiences in the lab, often referring to specific human emotions. But also in the lab, actually, they sort of express this emotion verbally and non-verbally. And in that regard, multimodal discourse analysis has been helpful in providing evidence for when and in what contexts their affect and emotions come into play, which triangulates the focus group data, by the way. And then on the other hand, the survey results gauge to what extent the affective domain influences their learning. So within the framing of lab work as epistemic practice, so this has been conceptualized as epistemic affect, which is an important aspect of learning science in a naturalistic setting of doing science. So Jabber and Hammer here, so they have this, I mean, our work really builds on their, a lot of work on epistemic affect. They argue that epistemic affect is a more specific construct referring to feelings within science rather than a more general affective feelings and attitudes towards science. So it is really contextualized within the doing of science. So the first part of our findings that I would like to share with you today is about emotions within epistemic practice. From the focus groups, we have found a wide range of human emotions, so both of positive and negative valence. So these are, of course, not exhaustive. There's more to it, but I'm tabulating here, let's say 10 most prevalent epistemic emotions. And obviously, I'm not expecting you to read the tiny letters here, but let me illustrate with two examples. So, so students feel joy in the lab of making something of their own. And this could be of epistemic nature, for example, generating their own data, as opposed to, for example, borrowed data from the other groups, or in the context of the past pandemic. So they were given a data from somewhere. So they just had to analyze the data. So just the act of generating their own data, it seems to be giving them just a joyful experience. And they say that while any of these can be time consuming, they find the value in doing something worthwhile. For instance, Iman here says, you are using your own measurement, every measurement you make and every sample and standard and thing, you make it yourself. So you have to be accurate to get the results you can use. It was pretty fun. So that was a more positive emotional experience. But of course, lab work has been known to be a premise that induces anxiety, right? And this has been reported previously in our systematic review as well. But in the present study, we offer a bit of nuance to what kind of anxiety students experience in the lab. So there seems to be two different sources of anxiety. So one is of epistemic nature, and the other one is related to performance. So epistemic anxiety has been previously described as discomfort that we feel when confronted with the limitations of our knowledge. So when there is ambiguity and incoherence. In the lab, students seem to experience epistemic anxiety when they don't get the result that they want. So in other words, when the outcome doesn't meet the expectation. Delaney here says, like, you just burn down, like mentally and everything. Students also feel that when they are afraid of not performing well and thus failing, they experience this performance anxiety as well. So we believe that these aspects should be considered in our teaching practice in the lab, especially when giving feedback to the students in a way that attends to their emotional needs and experiences. And so the second part of the results is concerned with self-perception and identity. So we look into the lab discourse from the video recordings. I'm showing you here a stanza or an episode on affective discourse in the lab. So it's multimodal. It consists of both verbal and non-verbal cues. So Eliana is the student here on the left, who is working with Felix, her lab mate, on day one of their experiment. I will let you quickly read the stanza. So we interpret this kind of affective discourse as representing nascent identity development as a chemist. Jaber and Hammer talk about nascent scientific thinking in their study on primary science context. We argue that this may represent similar phenomena. So their sort of identity development just sort of beginning to grow. But we try to dig deeper into our data, and an item from our surveys triangulates this interpretation, as students tend to strongly disagree with the prompt, "I was nervous about handling chemicals." So we found a previous study by McCarthy and Widansky published in JCE, who found that handling chemicals could be a source of anxiety in the lab, and teachers should help alleviate this. We also triangulate this interpretation with the focus group data. So we find at least 3 ways in which students feel and perceive themselves in the lab that are epistemic in nature. One has to do with confidence, when they have a very good idea of what to do, when they know how to collect good data and draw a substantiated conclusion. In our previous study in Edinburgh, confidence has also been a parameter that we assessed when addressing affective learning, but we did it in the context of experimental techniques. Students also feel pride in a good work they deliver. So Cheyenne here, for example, says, not to brag, but Theo an instructor say that it might have been the best module 3 he had seen this year. And as we look into their lab reports, we could assess that they're feeling, they're taking pride in the good work that they delivered, had to do with that the knowledge claims are substantiated with evidence from the data. Humility is an affective trait that we substantiate from our data. This is very much epistemic. Some scholars refer to this as intellectual humility, when students feel humble for knowing that they don't know, that they can still make mistakes, but that's okay. So we argue that how students feel about and perceive themselves contribute to their identity development, either as a future chemist, a pharmacist in our context, or a pharmaceutical scientist. I will substantiate this claim further with these quotes from Ulf, Flynn, and Tarin. So Ulf here says, as a pharmacist, you can become a lot of things. If you end up in some kind of analytical tech position, then HPLC and GC will be relevant. But if you will end up at the pharmacy, then you're perhaps not going to use it as much. Flynn says it's relevant, especially in our future as a pharmacist, which makes them think that the experiment was interesting. So these students talk about relevance and the lack thereof, depending on their future career. And in our data, future orientation is quite big. And we argue that epistemic affect may either make or break the ways in which they envisage their future. And sometimes it's not about a distant future, but also the end of the course or the following course that builds on this one. Tarin takes a rather interesting look at how Danish pharmacy education is different from a lot of other countries in a way that it enables students to have more career options, which is very important in determining whether or not they find relevance in the lab work, especially in this case, chemistry. The next part of the results is concerned with affective learning strategies. So we are still working on the quantification of affective engagement from the lab discourse, and Aswin, my colleague, is helping me with that part. But let me share you some results from the surveys. So we designed a questionnaire on affective learning in the lab with some items derived from previously validated instruments, including the MLLI by Stacy Brett's research group. So most of these previously validated questionnaires assess more general affective constructs, such as attitudes and affective experience. In our questionnaire, we try to foreground the epistemic character of doing chemistry in the context of affective learning strategies. But of course, affective construct like handling chemicals and time perception in the lab, they are very much pertaining to lab work, so we include them as well. So from the first cohort of respondents of only 69 students, so we only have, I think, about 100, up to 200 actually. But this is the response rate that we got from the questionnaire. I'm highlighting a few items here that are epistemic. For instance, the first one here, the most satisfying thing for me in the lab was to try to understand the theory as thoroughly as possible. So this is epistemic in a sense that respondents are asked if what they do in the lab is somehow underpinned by scientific knowledge. The whole conundrum of theory-practice connection in the lab is very much epistemic, really. And with this item, we try to assess how that influences their affective experience. So on the increasing agreement scale of 1 to 10, an average of 7.2 is reported here, which may indicate that students seem to find satisfaction in trying to understand the underlying theory. In a SERP paper here, Fina and colleagues focus on how students conceptualize this connection, and they found that some students regard lab work as a multimodal representation of scientific theory. The item I like basing my conclusion on evidence here is also very much epistemic, and with a high agreement of 8.7 here, we have an idea of the extent to which students appreciate the epistemological basis of doing an experiment in the lab. by generating on data, evaluating the reliability of the analysis result, and making evidence-based knowledge claim. Likewise, curiosity is also very epistemic, and this is curiosity about lab work and all of its peculiarities. Jaber and Hammer argue that feelings of excitement and curiosity are grounded in students wanting to understand the phenomena. In a context where experiment can go wrong, the instruments sometimes they fail to work, and that they get weird results, epistemic affect could be a driving force that makes students ponder and wonder, perhaps even investigate more. And given the generally high agreement rates for these items, we think that students incorporate affective domain strategies to a large extent. So the last,
I'll give you a 1 minute call when you're ready.
I mean, sure. The last bit of the result is that we are developing this codebook on epistemic affect. So hopefully this will be useful for other researchers in this area and also practitioners who would like to develop their assessment strategy. Some provisional conclusions. So epistemic affect manifests in the lab through a wide range of emotional experiences and effective learning strategies. The dynamic between different epistemic emotions, they account for rich learning experience that may be similar to how professional scientists feel when they do experiments, good and bad, failure and success. They all contribute to human experiences of doing science. Second is that student self-perception about lab work contributes to their identity development within their educational context and future career aspirations. The third one is, while the students experience both positive and negative elements, it seems that their overall phenomenological account points to their appreciation of lab work as a whole, and also demonstrate the inherently effective and epistemic character of lab work. We also argue that this entanglement could also be mapped towards conceptual and social aspects, which is the work is still underway. And last but not least, so learning is so much more than thinking. Co-construction of knowledge also entails feelings for the work at hand, for the teamwork, and desires for future work. And with that, I'm ending my presentation. Thanks.